my good friend Trevor Loudon.
The year was 1984. Ronald Reagan had decided to seek a second term. Carl Lewis set a world record for the indoor long jump. And in my home country of New Zealand, our socialist Labour government had destroyed our military alliance with the United States. They decided to ban nuclear warships from our harbours.
Nuclear weapons are morally indefensible, and I support that proposition.
I began digging for answers. I met and interviewed security experts, even former New Zealand communist spies. I discovered that my country's national security had been betrayed by enemies within. This sparked 20 years of research into communism. It drew me inevitably to the movement's #1 target, the United States of America. The underside of American politics became my new focus. I began touring America, scouring communist archives in your libraries. I started sharing this vital information with anyone who would listen.
As I continued my research, I was shocked to find that the same underground culture that had infiltrated and reshaped New Zealand was also infiltrating every American institution. What was once considered the American dream is now considered xenophobic, racist, and fascist.
What was once considered Marxist and Leninist is now considered inclusive and progressive. As an outsider, I could see that the future of this great country is now hanging in the balance.
In my travels, I'm asked one question repeatedly. Why does a New Zealander care about the United States? I say there are two basic reasons. The first is gratitude. My country was saved from invasion by the Imperial Japanese Army in World War II by the massive sacrifice of your fathers and uncles and grandfathers at the battles of Guadalcanal, the Coral Sea, and Midway. That is a very strong memory in my country today, folks. The second reason is related, a little more selfish. If freedom should fail in the United States, if you lose your Constitution, your liberty, your economic dynamism, and your military superiority, all of which are in grave danger, the bad guys of this planet, I'm talking Russia, China, Iran, they will carve up this planet amongst themselves, folks.
If nothing changes, the world you and I grew up in will soon be but a memory. The world we leave to our sons and daughters will be but a shadow of what God has intended for them. Your Constitution warns you to guard against enemies, foreign and domestic. These are the stories that the enemies in your government and in the mainstream media do not want you to hear. This is our last stand. These are the enemies within.
Are you or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
Most communists don't say they're communists, they say they're socialists. That sounds a little softer.
Socialism has spread the shadow of human regimentation over most of the nations of the earth.
This isn't back in the 50s. This is going on right now, folks.
Their strategy is to undermine the confidence of our people in the American system and the principles on which it stands.
I don't think President Obama cares about our U.S. Constitution or our traditional American values.
If a person supports organizations which reflect communist teachings, he may be a communist.
He's been doing everything in his power to undermine the United States.
If a person defends the activities of communist nations while consistently attacking the domestic and foreign policy of the United States, he may be a communist.
If America is weakened, our allies are weakened. And then we talk about dominoes.
If a person does all these things over a period of time, he must be a communist.
And they are working hardcore to transform this country.
The socialists, the communists, and their followers would like to see the American spirit extinguished.
You've got an infiltration of our entire government.
But there are other communists who don't show their real faces, who work more silently.
There are congressmen who have actively colluded with the enemy.
the enemy is within because they are in our government.
The cleverest thing the devil ever did was to convince people he doesn't exist. You're working at the Department of Homeland Security. You are compiling databases of terrorist suspects. Can you tell us what you did after that?
Well, I finished the case up. I put it in the system. There were 67 records related to the case, individuals and organizations. Within about 2 weeks after I put the case into the system, I went on vacation and I was called from my colleague and said that they had removed the records entirely from the system. They didn't just modify them, they completely obliterated them, took them out. Those are the records related to the network of mosques and organizations operating in the United States that is linked to the San Bernardino shooting and to the Orlando shooting. Not only did they remove the records, but they also investigated me.
For what possible reason?
They said essentially that I did not have the authority to put those records into the system, even though I had been commended by the National Targeting Center for finding 300 terrorists. So essentially the last 3 years of my career, I was under investigation by 3 different government agencies, all at the same time. They determined that I was essentially more of a threat than these terrorist groups.
So did they ever claim that any of the records were inaccurate or untrue?
No, they couldn't because they were accurate.
So you were trying to do your job and you were basically persecuted by your own government. How does that make you feel as a professional intelligence officer?
Infuriated and stripped naked. It's a public humiliation. To sequester me in a small room for the last 11 months of my career with no assigned duties, and then have the audacity to say that those were not adverse actions. We're just conducting an investigation. It's cruel to do that to a person. It wasn't a moral infraction. It wasn't refusal to obey an order. It wasn't some crime that I committed. It was simply doing the job that I took a vow to do and had been recognized and awarded for.
Are there enemies in this country working to destroy this country?
I would say emphatically yes.
Could Hillary Clinton pass an FBI security check?
No, because if you have overt ties to organizations with known associations with terrorism, you cannot pass a background check.
2 years ago, I've got a friend who applied for a federal government job 2 years ago. The FBI drove to Canada to interview his communist uncle. On the strength of that interview, my friend was denied that position. Not because he was a communist, because his uncle was. So the point is this: your government has enemies who will use your weak and dishonest against you. Therefore, employees of the federal government need to be vetted.
When I applied for a government job, you fill out various forms. The forms that I filled out many years ago for government positions asked extensive questions about your background and your ideological affiliations. It could be from far right Nazi to far left communist or anything in between. The government wanted to know whether you were going to be a loyal citizen and uphold the Constitution. Today, they hardly ask you anything, so people basically can lie.
Most people think that the communists' infiltration of your government is a thing of the past.
You're not allowed to talk about communism. And if you do, you're called crazy and insane. So that tends to quiet you. I call that censorship through ridicule.
The Berlin Wall fell down. So why are you talking about a communist strategy in America? And isn't that a bit far-fetched for most people to swallow?
Unfortunately, it is. They have done a very, very good job of deceiving the American people.
This couldn't have happened without the Soviet Union collapsing. Took away the image of the enemy, said the Soviet Georgy Arbatov.
The collapse of the Soviet Union has actually advanced the communist cause around the world.
Collapse is part of their attack, exactly.
With the seeming disappearance of the Soviet threat, why would Americans care about communism any longer? What if those communists had simply morphed into progressives or democratic socialists? Here I am in Chicago to mingle with 3,000 progressives, democratic socialists, and old-style communists. Can you tell the difference? Welcome to the People's Summit.
When we talk about socialism, it helps people to understand that some aspects of American society are already socialized.
I think our basic definition of socialism is the workers owning the means of production, democratic control.
The true needs of the people.
Finding creative ways to restore fairness to healthcare, to the economy, to opportunities.
There's never been a period where people are so open to discuss socialism.
Our society so utterly fails to provide people with a decent standard of living, to provide people with freedom.
We're interested in working with other parts of the left, other parts of the working class movement to fight for the most ambitious demands that it's possible to win right now.
We need to start with more ambitious plans, knowing that the reality is that those plans will always get squashed down to half their size.
We are revolutionaries. We would like to have some kind of a mass revolutionary movement.
When you say socialism coming to America, do you think it can come peacefully, or do you think there's going to have to be upheaval, or is it going to be a combination? How do you see it coming?
Well, I don't think we're going to get socialism by an election.
I accept the reality that everything that's done here in the United States is not the best. And this notion of American exceptionalism, I guess, that if we do it, it must be the best, it's just not true.
You still have the communist vision that you once had, as a young man. You still that communist vision is still there. It can be achieved.
I say communism for me is it's never existed anywhere, but it's like the North Star. It helps keep me on track.
It's incredible. Only one side is fighting, and the side that's getting beat up doesn't even realize they're in a fight.
This movement will always be here in one form or another.
Democratic socialism is like stage 1 cancer. Even in Sweden, France, or Germany, it keeps slowly growing and will always eventually morph into terminal communism. Joel Frewa knows Venezuelan communism firsthand.
That old school communism that you saw with the USSR, it's not dead, it's alive and well, and it's not just in North Korea or Cuba. It's a 3-hour flight from Miami. Let's talk basic items: toilet paper, medicine, chicken, milk, powdered milk. You can't find them. It almost seems cartoonish or foreign, but when people go to the grocery store, they go in hope that they have the items that they need. I recently saw a tweet on Valentine's Day where a husband tweeted to his wife a photo where his Valentine's Day present was toilet paper. He made a heart of it and tweeted that to his wife because that was the present, because it's so hard to come by. People are dying waiting for medicines to come in. Yet the Maduro government, what they do is they blame it on the corporations who are hoarding these items in order to create unrest, which is completely false.
What do you think of American congressmen like Jose Serrano from New York, who praised Hugo Chavez on a regular basis? Greg Meeks attended his funeral. Several American congressmen were well-known supporters of Hugo Chavez. What do you think of those people?
To put it very lightly, I think they're scum. I think to support a regime which is so overtly oppressive of its people, it's quite frankly disgusting.
So how do good people get drawn in to such a movement?
If a person is hostile to communism, it's because of capitalist propaganda. So why would you walk up to somebody and tell them the whole truth? It would just alienate them, and it would be premature to do so. Much better to find a way to unite with them and to hide your long-term intentions until they were ready to hear them. That only makes sense, doesn't it?
Whatever problem you have, they always somehow bring it that the solution is socialism. They take advantage of people's vulnerabilities and their needs. They're experts at it.
It doesn't matter if you're talking about welfare. It doesn't matter if you're talking about cultural issues like gay rights or homosexual marriage. It doesn't matter if you're talking about economic issues, military issues. No matter what it is, for the left, the issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution.
In the 70 years the Soviets were leading the world communist movement, in that 70 years, the number that my people say is 150 million murdered. That's the number of the people communists killed. That's the equivalent of the Trade Center, the two towers coming down, 2 of them every day for 70 years.
pulling the trigger on somebody else was an act of love, because it meant that you were protecting or saving or dramatically improving the lives of people for not just now, but for millions of years in the future. I think of myself now as one of the sweetest, gentlest people on earth. I mean, I would rather catch a fly in a styrofoam cup and take it out the door than kill the fly. But back when I was a young communist, I was potentially one of the most dangerous people on the planet. Don't murder the kids, because the kids could probably have some sort of re-education. But if somebody is preventing the socialist utopia from coming into being, they are an enemy of humanity. If you were on the wrong side of history, your life was worthless to me.
So is there still a communist movement in America? How influential could these people possibly be?
Well, what is the difference between a Democrat and a socialist? I used to think there was a big difference. What do you think it is? What's the big difference between a Democrat and a socialist? You're the chairman of the Democratic Party. Tell me the difference between you and a socialist.
America's largest communist organization is 7,000 strong, 60 chapters nationwide, Democratic Socialists of America. Like all communists, DSA wants to abolish all private business and start a workers' revolution.
I'm a Democratic Socialist, probably because when I was 14, I read the Communist Manifesto. I believe that the working class is an agent of revolutionary change, and that our society needs to see a revolutionary transformation.
Based on the theories of Italian communist Antonio Gramsci, DSA seeks communist revolution through infiltration of America's leading institutions, cultural, religious, and political. DSA has infiltrated both houses of Congress. In the House, they have allies like New York Congressman Jerry Nadler, Chicago Reps Danny Davis and Jan Schakowsky, Californians Karen Bass and Maxine Waters, Iowan Dave Loebsack, Eleanor Holmes Norton from the District of Columbia, Alan Grayson from Florida, John Lewis from Georgia, and Gwen Moore and Mark Pocan from Wisconsin. DSA's US Senate friends include Barbara Mikulski from Maryland, Debbie Stabenow from Michigan, and Elizabeth Warren and Ed Markey from Massachusetts.
DSA's greatest success has undoubtedly been presidential candidate Bernie Sanders.
We have 80 votes in Congress now. We have the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which Bernie founded.
Bernie Sanders claims to be a democratic socialist who wants America to be more like Sweden, Denmark, Norway.
He wants America to look more like Scandinavia.
That's right. And what's wrong with that?
Like most democratic socialists, Bernie Sanders is a liar and a communist.
Sometimes American journalists talk about how bad a country is because people are lining up for food. That's a good thing. In other countries, people don't line up for food. The rich get the food and the poor starve to death.
In 2014, Sanders endorsed longtime Communist Party supporter Chuy Garcia's bid for the Chicago mayoralty. Sanders spoke alongside Scott Marshall, a leader of the Chicago Communist Party. In the early 1960s, Bernie Sanders studied in Chicago, where he joined the Young People's Socialist League and worked for the Communist Party-controlled Packing House Workers Union. In 1963, Bernie Sanders traveled to Israel as a guest of the pro-Soviet Hashemir Hitzat Youth Organization. Sanders worked on the Sha'ar Hamakim kibbutz, whose co-founder, Aharon Cohen, was in jail for spying for Moscow. Sanders was later kicked out of the kibbutz for being too lazy. By 1972, Sanders was in Vermont and active in the far-left Liberty Union Party. In 1980, Sanders backed the presidential campaign of pro-Cuba Socialist Workers' Party candidate Andrew Pulley. In 1985, while serving as mayor of Burlington, Vermont, Bernie Sanders was in Nicaragua celebrating the 6th anniversary of the brutal communist Sandinista dictatorship.
Bernie Sanders visited the Soviet Union on his honeymoon.
In 1988, Sanders and his new bride honeymooned in the then Soviet Union, which at the time was still threatening the United States with nuclear annihilation. Sanders negotiated with communist authorities to make Yaroslavl, near Moscow, a sister city of Burlington, Vermont.
Could you imagine if you visited Nazi Germany before the war ended, and then you're going to run for president here? You don't think there'd be